Hello and welcome to the 51st episode of This Week in Cloud Computing. I am your guest host, Uri Budnik. Amanda is away at South by Southwest. I was actually there yesterday myself, but I made it back in time to attend the show. And joining me is your co-host and my pal, Dave Linthicum. Hey, Dave, how are you?
I'm doing great, Yuri. How you doing? I was about to say, Amanda, you really let yourself go.
She's got to work on that haircut.
Well, great having you here.
Thank you, thank you. I'd like to let everybody know that today, Jeff Lawson, the co-founder and CEO of Twilio, will be joining the show in a little while for an interview. And before we dive into the stories of the week, I'd like to remind everybody, if you want to join the discussion, please do so. We'd love to hear from the people out there. You can do it in several ways. You can go to the website thisweekin.com/live, and there's a chat room there. Or through Twitter, you can tweet us or tweet the show specifically at TWI Cloud Comp, or the other one is you can use the hashtag TWICC or the hashtag Cloud. All those really get us in the radar of the discussion that's happening here and in the wider discussion as well. Also, I'd like to remind you that you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, and you can also look at it on YouTube, and you can even rate it when you are over there. So with that, Dave, I think you have a commercial announcement to make.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to welcome our new sponsor. It's going to be Zenos, Z-E-N-O-S-S. Zenos is a next-generation management solution that's being used today to monitor the world's leading cloud infrastructures. They provide insight and unified operations for large-scale physical and virtual cloud-based IT environments. And I urge you to go check them out at www.zenos.com, but also, just for This Week in Cloud Computing fans, download the Zenos ebook, 5 burning questions you can really manage the cloud? And you can get entered to win an iPad too, so I urge you to go check it out. They're at www.zenos.com/cloud. Check it out, guys. We love our sponsors.
Thank you, Dave. I'd like to start off by saying that in the past I've been in the show representing my company and answering questions on topics related to that. And on this particular show, I'm acting as co-host, so whatever opinions and discussions that I might participate in, I'm really talking about my own opinions in this case, and I'm not representing Rightscale, my full-time employer, at this point for this show, just to let everybody know. So with that, let's talk about the stories of the week. The first one is that HP announces their plans for the cloud. There was a press conference, their new CEO talked about it at length. And let me start by asking you your impressions of that, Dave.
Yeah, I mean, I blogged about it in InfoWorld, and you're going to see my post there tomorrow, the next day. And the reality is there's not a ton here. I mean, HP just dedicated themselves to moving to the cloud. They have an infrastructure as a service offering, that's planned. They have a platform as a service offering, that's planned. And obviously, they're looking to drive to the cloud. The problem with that, as with a lot of the big iron players, is that the cloud becomes kind of a two-edged sword for them, because as HP starts moving a lot of their assets out into the cloud and moves their customers out into the cloud and moves their sales cycles out into the cloud, they end up cannibalizing a lot of their existing traditional business. So it's going to be interesting to see how HP plays this out, how HP, very much like IBM and very much like Oracle and very much like a lot of the other big enterprise players out there, actually finesses their way into the cloud and if they're able to be effective. I'm skeptical right now. I think in the infrastructure as a service space, I mean, those ships have sailed. If HP has an offering in there, I don't think it's going to have a big impact. Same with platform as a service. So I'm not sure there's areas of the market where they really can be innovative and drive into new directions and add value into the space. So what are your thoughts, Yuri?
You know, we without discussing this beforehand, I think we're pretty much on the same page here. What makes me wonder is the server market is a multi-billion-dollar market globally. And if lots and lots of companies move their enterprise systems to the cloud, those are companies that are not going to be buying servers in large, expensive enterprise-class storage systems, for example. So it represents a dilemma for companies like IBM and Hewlett-Packard, and hence I see them making the move that they're doing today, is how do you still manage to capture a decent percentage or hopefully not a diminishing percentage of those enterprise IT budgets if things are moving to an infrastructure as a service world and you don't have an offering there? The companies that are building these infrastructure as a service offerings, mostly they talk about using inexpensive hardware. And that's not what goes into this really enterprise class systems up to now. You really avoided failures as much as you could. So they used big, expensive servers with double power supplies and lots of fans and lots of things to avoid any kind of server outage. That philosophical approach to building the systems is changing. You accept that servers will go down. You just plan on how to work around that. You use the word cannibalization. It represents some challenges. Not only are people buying the services in a different way, but the cycles are also different. You could spend a lot of time planning some infrastructure, and the really good enterprise salespeople get their particular hardware designed into whatever a particular company's requirements are going to be. And all that just starts going out the window as you move into the infrastructure as a service world. As I was thinking about this while I read the story, I realized that probably Microsoft has some pretty good upside here, because before now they just sold software, the operating systems, the applications, so they got a pretty good shot at capturing a bigger percentage of those IT budgets. On the Hewlett-Packard side, they have a lot of catching up to do. We've seen from the other companies that are building systems to compete with Amazon's Elastic Compute Cloud that it takes quite a bit of effort and it's not easy. So besides being capital intensive, I mean, we're talking about really large budgets for these things. There's a lot of know-how between hardware, servers, networking, virtualization layers, or the customized software that you need to know about. Is not something that you can just easily throw together. So you asked the question, and I agree. They're a little bit behind Hewlett-Packard is on their infrastructure as a service and platform as a service offering.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see if they're going to be effective, driving out into the market this late in the game. I mean, they are HP, and they are one of the 800-pound gorillas in the room. But the reality is, in the cloud space, I think it's anybody's bet. I mean, who would have thought that Amazon would be where they are today? A bookseller 10 years ago is now a major cloud computing provider going forward. And, in 5 more years, they may find that the majority of their revenue comes from the cloud computing side of things. And it's going to be difficult for the existing players, the traditional players, to catch up. And I'm not just picking on HP. I'm looking at Oracle, I'm looking at IBM, I'm looking at all the huge monster traditional enterprise players that are out there who are looking to basically capture a part of this market. Now, the thing is, they're in trouble a bit because you can't go out and push back against cloud. Everybody's going to push back against you. And everybody's looking for a cloud strategy from these folks. Yeah. However, if you look at the way they traditionally sell software, hardware and software, and even, some of the big software players like Oracle and Microsoft, it's going to be very difficult for them to transition into this new cloud computing market. And so I just think these guys have an uphill battle, to be honest with you.
Yeah, even though everybody in technology has heard about the innovator's dilemma, still, perhaps surprisingly, perhaps not, innovation comes from without, not from within. Amazon was not a data center company. They took a whole new, fresh approach to EC2 without worrying about people signing long-term contracts and committing to lots of revenue up front and all those things. And for the companies that have been in that business a long time, that represents a big cultural change and business model change. So it's not a simple thing. How do you jettison an old model that pays the bills today towards a new one that is still not really fully baked, some might say, in terms of how it's going to work in a large scale? So it's difficult to make predictions here. Clearly, they need to do something, and they need to be bold. It remains to be seen how these things will work out. I think we can agree on that one.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on HP and see how they do.
Yeah. So let me move on to the next story then, Dave. Intel is targeting security in the cloud with McAfee as of the recent acquisition of the company McAfee. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it looks like they're taking their security software and they're embedding it in chips, which is a little strange. And they're really going after the mobile devices to basically provide, the interaction between the existing, for the users in the clouds. They're able to provide security capabilities, tackling malware, authenticating users, and verifying, IP protocol addresses and websites. So they're getting down into the whole identity management kind of network security stuff. I didn't really get the strategy here, to be honest with you. If you look at the future of cloud computing, where we're going to very complex distributed systems as a model. So therefore, identity management, and centralized identity repositories repositories, and all these very sophisticated, almost enterprisey security models become the way in which you manage those environments. And it looks like Intel's kind of falling back on their old tricks. Everything in their world needs to exist on a chip, and they've basically taken the McAfee stuff and stuck it in their processors and are looking to manage security at the chip level. And I'm not sure that's going to be very effective going forward based on the security problems that we have with cloud computing. What are your thoughts, Uri?
Yeah, you know, once again, I'm not sure how you manage operating system potential security flaws and buffer overflows and issues related to that. Well, actually, buffer overflows, I'll take that one back. I'm not sure how you manage potential security holes in the operating system at the chip level. Seems like those are different layers, and it's not clear from the information that we have up to now exactly how that's going to work. I do sense that this is going to be a really important market, because think of all the tens of millions of connected handsets out there. They're really mini computers in your pocket. So a worm that can infect and spread quickly to lots of these can have some potentially devastating effects, or at minimum be a really big nuisance, at maximum erase people's contact info or other things. So it's probably very good from a priority standpoint that they're paying attention to this. Exactly how it comes into play, the information we have up to now doesn't really specify that. But in all these security issues, very much the devil's in the details. Exactly what and how is what really matters on these things. And the other thing that we've seen over time is that the people that look for security flaws are very, very clever. It's really hard to really boil something down.
Isn't this just a far too primitive of a play for them to make hay with any kind of security strategy here? I kind of felt it was a stretch to really kind of call this cloud security. I mean, basically doing network authentication, and they'll be able to do, to do some rudimentary security stuff, which is going to be embedded on a chip. I'm not sure how that kind of gets into how cloud computing ultimately will be secured going forward. It just seems like it's a force fit for them. In other words, they bought this company, McAfee, and they're a chip company, and therefore they forced McAfee on a chip, and cloud's cool, so they called it a cloud security strategy. I mean, do you think they're reaching here?
It feels like cloud washing to me. I mean, perhaps just a big announcement about how to authenticate your phone or users across the cloud. I know there was something about being able to embed private keys into chips before, so that you could self-sign certificates from your computer in a way that couldn't be hacked by potential security threats in your operating system. Not sure how that exactly maps into cloud. That might be more of a positioning thing than a real technology standpoint. On the other hand, it's good news in my opinion that they're paying attention to this particular area. How is this going to affect us? Yeah. And by that I mean lots of handsets out there. Somebody finds a zero-day exploit, goes in the wild before there's a way to control it. What are the ramifications? Interesting questions right now.
Yeah, but do you want your security solution on your chip?
No, because that to me that conveys that it's inflexible, right? You burn it into the chip. How are you going to modify that to deal with newer security threats?
Right. It's going to be an interesting play for them. I'm not sure how it's going to bear out. Looks like cloud washing to me. I'm not sure there's a huge amount of value there.
Yeah,
sorry to say.
And I don't have the answer to this question, but how many handsets out there are using Intel chips? I know the ARM processors are very popular, but I don't know in the mobile space how what kind of volume of chips Intel is shipping for those handsets out there.
Well, we'll see how it goes with Intel.
Yeah, this could be a play in that direction as well. So moving to the next story, Aruba Networks has launched an architecture to help companies leverage the cloud and mobility as the traditional LAN begins to dissolve. This is pretty much the headline from the story from CRN that I just read verbatim there. So, Dave, let me ask you first, do you understand exactly what they're talking about in this, in this story?
I think I do, but I had to read it a couple of times. Not really a networking guy. So it looks like they're launching this thing called Move Mobile Virtual Enterprise Architecture, which offers context-aware networking. So they're getting to the point where networking is kind of moving beyond a physical device, moving into kind of a virtual device, where they understand exactly how you're leveraging networking, and the context is being leveraged, or the architectural environment in which you're leveraging at. So the rise in public and private cloud infrastructure is a massive increase in a number of mobile devices businesses are basically driving them in this direction because they believe that ultimately everything is going to be everywhere, and devices and IP addresses and the way in which we communicate and the devices that we carry are going to be everywhere. So a new architecture is needed to provide some additional capabilities as we start moving into the cloud. And I kind of felt this was much like the Intel story. It seemed like they're stretching it a bit into the cloud. Basically it's a mobility story, not necessarily a cloud story. So what are your thoughts on this, Uri?
Yeah, again, I think calling it cloud is a stretch. It seems like a good idea for, all of us that work in offices, we have visitors that come to the office and ask about connecting to your Wi-Fi. Companies are starting to have a guest network that can be used. People are showing up and they might have a laptop and a phone, maybe even an iPad, so 3 devices that are coming in as a guest network. As I was reading through the materials on their website, it seemed like an interesting approach to be able to have these policies for when you have somebody visiting your office, granting them access in a limited way, not only for security purposes, but also so they don't use a lot of the bandwidth in your office, perhaps. I've been in offices where they'll put the guest Wi-Fi username and password in the whiteboard. And I imagine they have it completely segmented from the rest of the company. But what if that person starts downloading a massive file and really puts a dent on that company's particular bandwidth for that day, for that hour as that's happening? So that's an interesting thing to be able to have a little bit more control. Perhaps you could do it with the tools that exist today, but you need to have a lot of sophistication in understanding how to configure whatever networking devices you might have. So packaging something that makes it easier for IT administrators that are not network gurus to be able to set that kind of access would be interesting. That's all within an office or within a campus, for example. Not sure how that translates into people that are roaming with devices and going to other places, though.
Yeah, and is this kind of Aruba and all the other network folks out there suddenly calling their stuff cloud computing? I mean, just because they have a network. I mean, is this a bit of a reach as well?
Yeah.
I think we're going to see a ton of this stuff as the year progresses. And I did at Cloud Connect last week, where suddenly compilers and networking companies and people who are creating databases and other things that really don't have kind of the common attributes that we'd expect the cloud would have, are suddenly positioning themselves into the cloud. Networking is certainly important aspects of cloud computing, but not sure it's a pure cloud computing play per se.
Yeah, and without picking on Aruba, I imagine you're hypothetically Acme Technology out there, people sitting around a boardroom and saying, what's our cloud strategy? What are we doing for cloud? And somebody just trying to figure out what their existing product line is and a new twist on it and calling it cloud. So there's got to be a lot of that stuff happening out there where it's not a radical change in the technology, it's just sort of a rebranding and repositioning to make it fit with the current buzzwords.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is, who doesn't have a cloud strategy? And everybody, for building hardware and software systems and things like that, everybody has some kind of a cloud strategy, some way they fit into the cloud computing model. I think we all get it. Yeah. Now, we just have to be very adamant about what really lives up to kind of the expectations of what we think around cloud computing.
It really has made it quite confusing for the uninitiated, let's say. You were talking about Cloud Connect last week. I was at South by Southwest yesterday. I just flew in. And you really have to explain what you mean, specifically when you talk about cloud computing. If you're talking with a group of people, it could mean radically different things. So it is creating some confusion out there, especially for the people that are not really in the market, and they just hear cloud and they're not really sure what you mean. They just hear that it's good at this point.
Absolutely.
So, probably falling in the same vein as the next story, by the way, at least in my opinion. But let's see, Dave. Federal agency predicts 40% savings from move to the cloud.
Yeah, I saw that. This is the one I submitted. Yeah, I mean, we'll see, if they can save 40% or not. This is a SaaS story, and ultimately, they're looking at taking a particular application domain into the cloud, and every SaaS story you hear is going to save money.
Actually, could you say the federal agency and what they're planning on doing?
Yeah, I believe it's going
to.
Yeah, the EEOC are the one who are actually moving into the cloud, and they're leveraging SaaS, as all of most of the federal government agencies are as well. There's a lot of Salesforce there. There's a lot of software as a services in that play, and of course they're claiming they're able to save 40% over time. Now, this is kind of on the heels of the strategy that was published a few weeks ago by Vivek Kundra, who said that $20 billion would be spent on cloud computing by the federal agencies over a certain amount of time, which is undefined. And now you're starting to see these press releases that are being put out there around the implementation of cloud computing within the federal agencies. One of the things that's missing from this, and I'm sure they're saving 40% on their application dollars versus building the same thing on premise, is a strategy. Is, what's their infrastructure as a service story? How does this stuff fit into their infrastructure? What money is saved out of agility? What money is saved in all the different aspects and benefits of cloud computing that aren't listed in here? So we're going to get what I call these tactical wins, where people declare success around the implementation of a small cloud computing component, but we have to understand how cloud computing or this implementation or this project exists in context of the rest of the federal computing enterprise. What do you think, Uri?
Well, what I found interesting here is, as I was really getting into the details, that it was already a hosted application with another vendor. So
right.
I think they're just calling it a big win by calling it cloud, but as I get my facts directly from the story, they were hosting Oracle financials from a different provider called Momentum. They switched to a new provider, still a hosted application, still Oracle financials, they're just calling it cloud. So, they went from software as a service to cloud. A few years ago, we were calling this application service providers. Doesn't feel like a radical change, as you were saying. They're touting how easy it's going to be to migrate. Well, you're going from Oracle applications to Oracle applications, from one provider to the other. I mean, it's not a flip a switch and you're done, but it's not a radical new approach to how to run this particular application anyway.
Well, let's start calling this what these things are. These are called false successes, and so they're declaring success with false assumptions around the use of cloud computing and the benefits of cloud computing. And we're going to see a ton of this. Yeah. We're going to see a lot of the cloud computing providers and consulting organizations and technology providers are going to push their customers to go out and declare success with their particular pieces of technology. Yeah. People are going to consider that a success, but I don't think ultimately this is very successful implementation of cloud computing. And we have to be very careful about what is a correct and proper way to leverage this technology and what's just cloud washing and basically spin. And I think this is a lot of cloud washing and spin at the end of the day. Yeah. So I think you and I may agree on that.
Yeah, so I noticed that too, but there could be a good outcome here if it becomes accepted that cloud computing for the federal government in the particular instance we're discussing here, if it becomes accepted as a very good alternative, and maybe in this case it's just semantics more than anything else. But the next time around, they're looking at a project that's not a hosted application, that's a custom application. And instead of buying servers to deploy that, they really look at an infrastructure as a service provider. Maybe we can look back and this was a baby step in that direction. The story talks about right now there being a federal agency that essentially runs data centers. The federal agencies hire them and they get quotes on how much a particular group of servers will cost for them. I have to believe that the federal government, whatever agency they're running, is not the most efficient at doing this compared to an Amazon or Rackspace, Storm on Demand, any of these other companies that do this. So maybe this is the door prying open and somebody accepting that this is a good way to go.
Where's the strategy? I mean, that's the thing with these guys. In other words, I get it. You're solving some tactical application problems by leveraging cloud computing as it makes sense. But the thing is, where's the overall strategy where you're taking your existing architecture? What's going to happen year 1, year 2, year 3, all the way through year 10? How are you going to leverage infrastructure as a service? How are you going to leverage the existing cloud computing initiatives that are going on within the federal government? What's your security architecture going to look like? What's your governance architecture going to look like? What's your management architecture going to look like? Yeah. And I don't understand why it's that difficult for these questions to be answered now, because without a plan, you're going to fail. And I think that the government needs to get around this fact that the strategy really is where the rubber meets the road with cloud computing, because you have so many moving parts and so much risk that you're putting on there, as well as opportunity. So I'd like to see some strategic thinking coming out of these guys. Yeah,
that's true, Dave. If you try to boil this down, this is like a company announcing that they moved from hosted Exchange to hosted Gmail and calling it cloud because they moved. It's a move, but it's not really a radical change taking place there. So I agree with your position on this, by the way. So moving on to the next story. Networking features make Amazon's private cloud more useful, and is referring to the VPC, the virtual private cloud offering that Amazon has tied to their EC2. Did you look into the details of how that works, Dave, and what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, what it is basically is a change in the way in which they run kind of the virtual firewall within their existing system. So the upgrade ultimately will expand the ways that the VPC, the virtual private clouds, can be used. And the example that they gave is users can now create a public-facing network for web services, while back-end systems such as databases or application servers are placed in a private network with no internet access. Let me give you a good use case for this, and I think this is a valuable and significant release, believe it or not, even though it's under everybody's radar screens, because when I'm building clouds, and I'm actually building clouds within clouds, such as Amazon's, EC2, I need to have the capability to keep certain domains within that environment basically locked up. And other things such as APIs that are exposing functionality or exposing data need to be public-facing and need to be managed as a public-facing environment. And right now with the VPCs that are out there, and I'm not picking on Amazon because they're all very similar, you either lock it up and don't expose anything and just have the firewall, whole port 80 issue that you're dealing with internally, that you're dealing with in the cloud. There's no way to do it in a granular way. Where you can do it on the enterprise, you basically set it into a DMZ and you put it in public facing environment, and Amazon's providing you the ability to do this with kind of a soft configuration. So that's very cool. So as I build my application, I stand at my data, I stand at my services, I stand at my processes, I stand at my interfaces, I can secure them how I need to secure them behind the firewall. My virtual private cloud, I own that space. Basically, it's functionally equivalent to owning physical servers within Amazon. And anything that needs to be externally facing, such as web services to handle APIs, handle management systems, things like that, I can put in its own domain. So I think it's a significant release from, at least it's important to, architects like me, that I'm able to do this stuff with this technology. What do you think?
I think this is one of those technologies that's rather complicated and complex. Not a lot of people have a lot of understanding on this virtual private clouds, VPNs, inside and outside networks and how that works, but it's rather significant. Let me actually take a step back and remind people, for EC2, for Amazon's Elastic Compute Cloud, it's just a humongous collection of servers. And you can send up one, a dozen, a few hundred, and up to now, and up to recently, let's just say, all of them were connected to the internet directly, so you could reach all the servers from the internet. To keep them secure, you would close all the ports, a lot of the ports, for whatever services did not need to be running there. A few months ago, actually, it's probably over a year ago now, I forget the exact date, they rolled out a service called VPC, Virtual Private Clouds. You could still stand up a collection of servers, a group of servers, but you could isolate them so that they couldn't see the internet. You could build a tunnel, a VPN connection to your own data center. That way you had access to these machines. The machines could actually have IP addresses from your own range of addresses that you would give them, but they could not be reached from the internet. So that they kind of felt like part of your own network. And with the new features they rolled out is what Dave was explaining. Now you have a lot more flexibility on how you configured what machines can be accessed and how for the different purposes you might be seeing. In a classic data center, you'll have your app servers, like Dave was saying, and they might be serving APIs or web pages, so you'll give those real IP addresses. Sometimes they call those external routable IP addresses. But your database machines have no reason to be reached from the outside. So now you can create different subnets and separate things and make it more secure that way. So it's one of those changes, as you were saying. I think it's key for architects. It addresses a lot of the things they've been used to doing and know how to do well in data centers that just wasn't possible to do in EC2 up to now because of the additional complexity that it would add. But they've been rolling out lots of features at a pretty quick pace, and this seems like a continuation of their innovation that they keep rolling out.
One of the things that I thought was kind of a killer application for this is you're going to be able to build clouds, using this stuff much more easier. So instead of using the public cloud within Amazon, if you're skittish about that, you can build your own cloud computing infrastructure, which is a great thing for my clients because they're looking for something like this, and then have the architectural configuration that you need. You are going to have some APIs that are outward facing, the ability to have external organizations get in there and deal with them, and you want a certain amount of things that are locked up behind the firewall or behind the virtual firewall that Amazon is able to provide. So the ability to get out there and build cloud computing systems that are private clouds and leverage those, as they for a public cloud and externalizing those interfaces, I think that's a great advantage.
Yeah, I hope the guys from the HP cloud are reading up on this stuff because they got a lot of catching up to do.
They sure do.
So with that, we're going to go to a commercial break for one of the sponsors, and we'll be back with the interview with Jeff Lawson from Twilio in a moment.
Shield Maiden.
Yes?
Ragnarok is upon us once again.
Who's that?
Oh, never mind. Just go with it.
Okay.
Storm! Storm on demand! Storm on demand! Storm on demand is an infrastructure as a service, cloud computing platform that is powerful enough to replace dedicated servers. A proprietary cloud platform designed by Liquid Web, one of the largest web hosting providers with over 12 years of experience. It is easier to use and less expensive than Amazon EC2. Features include server setup in minutes, easy scaling, backup and restoration capabilities, and pay-as-you-go utility-style billing. Options include cPanel, Fantastico, Ubuntu, Debian, CentOS, fully managed servers, private networking, and swords like this, and little guys that we do not have in this commercial, but it doesn't matter, because this is cooler. Storm On Demand can be found at stormondemand.com, at Storm On Demand. Ragnarok be damned. Storm On Demand. If you do not get Storm On Demand, I will come to your house with my sword and make you get it.
Hello, everyone. We have Jeff Lawson, the co-founder or CEO of Twilio. Let me give you a little bit of background on him, and then we'll jump right into the interview portion. Jeff received the 2010 Tech Follows Award for Disruptive Innovation. I love that, the Disruptive Innovation part. And he was named number 18 on the Business Insider's 2010 Silicon Valley Top 100 list. Prior to founding Twilio, Jeff served as an early product manager at Amazon Web Services, sometimes called AWS, and StubHub, and is as the founding CTO, that is. So, Jeff, welcome to This Week in Cloud Computing.
Thank you, Uri. Pleasure to be here.
You know, perhaps the best place to start is if you enlighten all of us and explain a little bit of what Twilio is, and also what people were doing before Twilio existed to create voice applications.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, we're all familiar with Amazon Web Services. The quickest way for me to describe Twilio is to say we're Amazon Web Services, but for telecommunications, right? So it's a set of infrastructure APIs that allow you to provision telecommunications services in the cloud in real time with a pay-as-you-go pricing model. So like Amazon's got computing and storage and queuing and all those primitives. Our primitives are phone numbers. You can get phone numbers anywhere in the U.S., local, toll-free. You can then receive calls on those phone numbers. You can place calls and just pay on a per-minute basis for what you use. You can also use those phone numbers to send and receive text messages. And again, you pay for the messages that you send and receive. And it's all sort of designed to get a developer and their company up and running very quickly, assuming that they don't have a background in telecommunications, but they know the web and they know web APIs. And they can use our RESTful API and our webhook API to build this stuff without having to really understand all of the complexities that are going on under the hood. They get to consume it essentially as a service, as a utility.
Yeah. So what were people doing before? Say I had a company and I wanted to have a call center, and people would call in and press a particular digit depending on who they wanted to reach for different types of information, and I need to figure out how to put this kind of capability in my office. What were companies doing to solve this problem before Twilio existed?
Yeah, it's a pretty straightforward, sort of on-prem to the cloud model here, the way I look at it, which is, if you say 10 years ago I was rolling out a call center or an IVR, sort of like you described, press 1 for this, press 2 for that. The way you would do it is you had two components. You'd essentially go to a carrier, a telecommunications carrier, someone like a tier 1 AT&T or Sprint, or a level 3 or a Quest or a Global Crossing, one of these guys, right? And you buy capacity, you buy access to the network. And essentially that's things like T1s, T3s, right? You have to do capacity planning, and you have to figure out how many calls you expect to be doing, buy that much capacity. And then you've got, and that's where carriers talk about dumb minutes, right? It's just sort of voice transport. So on the other end of it, you need the intelligence of the application. So what you would do is you would plug in a smart box, right? You'd plug in something from Cisco or something from Avaya or Nortel or Microsoft Communication Server, something like that. that ran either in your data center or in your networking closet that sort of lit up all the application intelligence that you needed, whether it was IVR, whether it was call center, call distributor, notification app, whatever it is. And then if you needed to customize that, integrate it with your own business logic, integrate it with your own data sources, right? Then you've got a whole whole project around custom programming, oftentimes in sort of proprietary formats, proprietary languages, weird APIs that take a steep learning curve in order to really build the ideal solution that you're looking for. So sort of this combination of buying access from a carrier, buying a smart box that's an expensive CapEx from a vendor, plugging those two things together, and then having the expertise to deploy, manage, update, maintain that application stack going forward. And so it really required a lot of expertise in this field and a lot of vendor selection and a lot of pretty heavyweight contracts and expenditures to get something like this up and running.
Yeah, and a lot of things that need to work well together, and when something breaks, you actually don't know where the problem might be.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of vendor finger pointing, and that guy's fault, this guy's fault, and capacity planning, and just sort of all of the typical on-prem problems with a system of sufficient complexity.
Yeah. So by the way, Dave, in keeping with the theme from the stories earlier, not that I don't know if you guys position it as cloud in your branding, but really this is that kind of big shift. Instead of having to lease T1s or DS3s into your own equipment that you need to know how to program and configure and have those different kinds of expertise, you can flip all that and go to a service type of model. I don't know exactly what you call it, minutes as a service or IVR as a service. But by the way, for the people watching, IVR means, I forgot, voice response.
Interactive voice response.
So that means one of those applications where you call and it says, press 1 for this option, press 2 for this other option, press 3 for that. Those applications are called IVR applications.
Yeah, and that's just one of the many kinds of applications. You can build with Twilio's IVRs. There's PBXs, which is a private branch exchange. That's sort of your company phone system, and things like notification, things like group collaboration and conferencing, and group text messaging, and call centers, all sorts of things like that.
Are you finding that people are replacing something that existed already, or is the use of Twilio brand new applications for people that didn't have the kind of budgets that it took to go out and buy equipment and do all these things?
Yeah, it's a bit of both, right? So if you just spent a ton of money on a brand spanking new Avaya system, right, it's unlikely in any sort of cloud category that you're just going to throw that thing in the garbage. But what we find a lot of is when those systems come time, their expiration date has passed, and it becomes time to reevaluate. Oftentimes 5-10 years later, you say, well, we're re-architecting 5-10 years later. What is the right way to architect this in 2011? And that's where you see people, if they are replacing things, saying, well, given that it's 2011, it's time to really look seriously at the cloud. On the flip side of that, we see a lot of people who are building new applications, right? And that's pretty easy, right? Because with something like Twilio, you build and you can even, you can prototype and you can deploy it in a very small amount of time, right? We regularly hear from customers like, hey, I built this application in an afternoon, and I was expecting it to take 6 months.
Yeah.
In fact, we actually had a customer who's operated an IVR for 20 years. It's a recycling hotline. And for several years, they'd known that they had a maintenance nightmare on their hands. The thing was falling apart because it was 20 years old. And they kept getting quotes from the sort of legacy vendors for, 12-month implementation time frame and $500,000 in hardware and software and professional services and all this stuff. And they kept balking at that and putting it off. Then they discovered Twilio, and one of their developers had built the prototype in 2 hours. Yeah. Using, off-the-shelf PHP, MySQL, LAMP stack that they were already using to power the web applications. So a great example of just saying, look, with the cloud, you just, these enterprise timeframes don't make any sense anymore.
Yeah. We had a company meeting, and one of the engineers, just to show off Twilio, and this is not something I discussed with you beforehand, Jeff, we launch a lot of cloud servers, and I know you used to work for AWS. He built a quick and dirty app where you could call a number, press 1 to launch an M1 small, 2 to launch an M1 large, and so on, and we were standing up servers via phone call. It wasn't completely practical in any kind of useful way, but it was just kind of a way to show how quickly you could throw up a Twilio app and have it running.
That's really cool. Tell us all the phone number.
What was that?
Tell us all the phone number.
I couldn't hear you there.
Tell us all the phone number to call.
You know what? Actually, we took that down. This was probably a few months ago, and we don't have that running. And we wouldn't want to pay for all those servers either. But I don't know. There might be something really interesting and practical. Sometimes with this playing around kind of projects, good things pop out of there. Well, let me ask you. So I see how people that have invested lots and lots of money on existing systems, they reach their end of life and they go with Twilio. You talked a little bit about the new projects that people are developing. Is there something that's interesting or really innovative that you can speak about that'll give people an idea of the kind of things that are being built using Twilio?
Absolutely. There's something interesting and innovative almost every day. In fact, just today I saw a write-up about how a new company called AdStruck, who is letting people buy billboards, sort of in an eBay model almost. You just go to the website and basically put in your credit card and you can buy billboards, billboard space. They had been running a billboard campaign in New York City with Gary Vee, where he had a phone number on the billboard, and it was his promo. Call this phone number and talk to Gary Vee right now. And the phone number is powered by Twilio and went up on a whole bunch of billboards all around New York City. And it was a really neat promotion. And they threw it together. The Twilio part, they threw together in very little time. And it was a great way to launch the service and show not only how easy it is to buy billboards with their service, but also how you get direct response off of billboards. And so they're also selling the medium of billboard advertising, which is not what necessarily people think of as the sexiest form of advertising. So I thought it was a really innovative way of showing, look at the direct response capabilities and look how easily we could build that and scale it using Twilio.
And these are not phone engineers that have to be on staff to build this stuff.
Yeah, it's probably just a couple of lines of code running on AWS or something somewhere that powers this phone number, and it just scales as much as they need, as however many people call in because they saw the billboards. It just completely scales for them.
So I was on your website and I saw your product OpenVBX. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. OpenVBX is an application that we wrote and we open sourced that implements Google Voice-like functionality, but instead of it being for consumers, it's designed for businesses. And what we did is we wrote it completely using our public APIs, our normal APIs that everybody has access to. And we wrote it in PHP and MySQL, just sort of a typical open source LAMP application. And we open sourced it, and it's got a plugin architecture and all this stuff. And the whole idea was give developers this really advanced code base for implementing things like a virtual PBX, like Google Voice, for the context of a multi-user environment that actually lets you end up building, it's got drag and drop interface for building IVRs and call flows and things like that. And then it's got the interface to say, oh, and if you end up here, let's leave a voicemail let's leave a voicemail for the entire sales team, and we'll, triage who's going to take that voicemail and things like that. So it's got these collaboration tools and voicemail and transcription of the voicemails and this combined inbox that combines voicemails and SMS messages and all that stuff, just like Google Voice, but it's multi-user and it's designed for companies who have, sort of more complex, more interesting use cases than just a consumer does who's using Google Voice.
Yeah, I was reading over the materials and it looks really interesting because you can, just playing around with a system that's not too complex, you can set up a whole really bunch of cool features for your company's PBX there.
Yeah, and you can set up a company PBX. You run it on, any LAMP stack, so any web server that's got PHP and MySQL and things like that on it. But what's really cool is it's open source, right? So, you don't like the way something works or you want a new feature, you just crack open the source code, and it's just web development, right? It's just PHP, and you can add front-end features or, call features to the application. And again, you didn't really have to know anything about telecom to do it. It's just, PHP code.
So Jeff, we know that you have lots of.
I'll tell you about. Let me tell you the coolest thing that I've seen written on top of OpenVBX, if we have a second. Was a developer named Andrew Watson wrote this really cool plugin for it that lets you plug in your Foursquare credentials, and when you get a call, it will go ping Foursquare's API, and depending on where you checked in, route your call. So if you check in at the office, it'll send the call to your desk phone.
Oh.
If you check in at your home, it'll send it to voicemail, right? If you check in anywhere else, it'll send it to your cell phone. But I thought that was a really neat, way of saying, well, look at the location stuff that Foursquare is doing, and match that up with Twilio and OpenVBX, and have this really neat integrated environment using essentially Foursquare as the concept of presence. Where am I?
Yeah, see, when you open up the possibilities for people is when those really cool ideas emerge sometimes. Somebody
Yes,
somewhere has one
exactly.
of those light bulb moments, and something that just you never even considered for your product. Or somebody comes up with a really cool way of deploying a feature there.
Absolutely. When we started Twilio, we had no idea that this is how people would use it, right? It's just amazing, the unleashing the creativity of the world's developers.
Yeah, and by the way, I began by asking you what it was like and how people were running this stuff before, because years ago I went through the whole process of having to contract all these different pieces to build an IVR, an interactive voice response system, and it took months and months to do. So right away I saw how useful your stuff is.
Oh, cool. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So we know that you have a lot of partners. Can you talk to us about how were you able to have such a big ecosystem of partners?
Yeah, it's primarily the developers we consider to be our biggest partners, right? We've got over 30,000 developers using Twilio, and they're just building the most amazing things. And really what that goes down to and how do we reach those developers is, we started the company, we were developers, we wanted this solution to solve our own problems because we had wanted this essentially for ourselves, and not having seen something that solved our problems, we said, well, let's go build it. And then when we started, we launched it and we started marketing this and reaching other developers, right, we were basically marketing to ourselves, right, because we were the target audience, we were developers, we were the ones who wanted solutions to this problem, and so it just came quite naturally to us, I would say, and so we started reaching developers sort of online and offline, and pretty quickly, we started hiring some evangelists, and right now we've got 4 evangelists who go to events around the country and, meet developers both online and offline, and, essentially are just showing developers, look, you can have this tool in your tool belt, which is being able to control telephony, SMS, and voice. What kind of things can you do with it? I bet you have use cases, and pretty much across the board, we find that developers have wanted to do this kind of stuff, but it just, the way I look at it was, my second company, I was the first CTO of StubHub.com, and there we had to do the logistics to connect ticket sellers to get the ticket from them to the box office just in time before the event starts so that the buyer can pick it up and walk into the show or the sporting event. And so we said, wouldn't it be neat if when the ticket sells on the website, we can automate a phone call out to the ticket seller and say, hey, seller, this is StubHub calling. You have a new, your ticket just sold. Press 1 if we should dispatch a courier to your office. Press 2 if we should dispatch a courier to your home, right?
Yeah.
And then dispatch a call out to the courier and say, hey, courier, this is StubHub calling. We have a new order for you. Press 1 if you accept this order, and you can deliver the ticket from this address to the ballpark by 6 p.m. today. Right, so this whole workflow planned out about how we'd get the ticket from the seller to the venue in time, and then we looked at our engineering team, we had a bunch of web developers, and we're trying to launch a product, and we said, God, we have no idea how to do that, right? It's just, you may as well have asked us to go build you a suspension bridge.
Yeah.
It just falls into the category of things that we don't know how to do.
Yeah.
And so the whole idea is, hey, developers, now you can do this, right? Put it in your tool belt and be able to now sell this to your customers or to your clients and incorporate this into your apps and all sorts of neat things like that.
Yeah.
And a great example is I don't know if you're familiar with GroupMe, the group text messaging company. And they met Daniela, one of our evangelists, at a hackathon in New York City last year. And she introduced them to Twilio and said, hey, with Twilio, you can buy phone numbers and you can do text messaging and all this kind of stuff. And 12 hours later, they had basically built GroupMe. They were already getting TechCrunch coverage. And, jump ahead a few months, they were raising a really big round of financing and blowing it out because they built something really useful. And it's all because they were able to get up and running really quickly and just let their imagination run wild, as opposed to saying, I'm going to go haggle with vendors for the next 12 months before I can, send my first text message.
What I think it's interesting here is that anecdotally, it seems like a lot of startups, ideas come from working at a company and having a problem you can easily solve, and the idea then comes for a new product, then people then go on to start a company addressing that particular use. But
Yeah, absolutely.
by the way, Dave, I've been
The thing for-
monopolizing Jeff here, and I haven't given you the opening to ask any questions if you want to jump in.
Yeah, really. Jeez. Just kidding. So the only question I have, the one question I have is, what's the most creative application for SMS service that you guys have seen using your technology?
It makes me pick favorites, right? Well, the group text messaging, the group text messaging guys are awesome. So, GroupMe and Beluga and Fast Society and GroupFlyer. There's a whole lot of companies who are approaching group messaging all in different ways and all with different ways that they're building it. But it's really creative, and it's just sort of, unleashed this whole idea of streamlining communications. It's not really a social network, so it's not Twitter and it's not Facebook, but it's a different form of communication that people are finding incredibly useful. Is saying, I want to use SMS for a private communication with a group of people that I intersect with for some reason, either because they're my coworkers, or because they're my family members, because I'm going on a ski trip with them this weekend, whatever it is. That's really cool. Another really neat one is I've seen a few guys who have SMS or voice-enabled their door buzzers, right? So I don't know if you know the guys at Sunlight Labs. They do a lot of hacking on sort of Gov 2.0 projects and things to sort of expose more government data to developers and get developers to build useful apps for municipalities. And they did this really neat thing where they wired up Twilio to, I believe it was an Arduino, that was wired into the door lock at the front of the building. And if you walk up to the door and you send a text message or you call it and you enter a PIN, it'll let you in the door. So really, really neat stuff like that too.
That's pretty cool. So with that, I think we're going to bring the interview to an end, Jeff. But do you want to share with us your Twitter handle? Is there something that people can follow you with on the internet?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm Jeffy L. I'll spell that one out because it's not necessarily obvious. Jeff, so F is in Frank, F is in Frank, I-E-L. L is in, I don't know, Larry or Lawson, my last name. So Jeffy L. That's where I am on Twitter. And, yeah, feel free to message me.
Well, thank you very much for spending time with us today. And I would like to tell anybody out there watching this podcast that's even have any kind of minimum programming skills, Twilio is really interesting to just take out for a twirl and test it out a little bit. You can build some pretty interesting applications rather quickly. And also, as we're wrapping up the show, David, thank you very much for helping me out in my first foray here at co-hosting with you.
Oh, you did great, Uri. I appreciate you having you here. And also, I'd like to thank our sponsors at Storm on Demand, at their handle on Twitter, Storm on Demand, and also Zenos, Z-E-N-O-S-S. And don't forget to download the ebook at www.zenos.com/cloud for a chance to win an iPad 2. And if you'd like to sponsor This Week in Cloud Computing, we love our sponsors. Please send a message to sponsor@thisweekincloud.com.
Thank you, Dave. And for those of you out there, be sure to join us again next week at the same time. Have a great day.